My name is Gwen Alcott, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a senior financial advisor at a mid-sized wealth management firm in Calgary, which sounds more impressive than it feels on a Tuesday morning when you're scraping ice off your windshield at 7:15 in November and wondering how your life got so quiet. That's the thing nobody tells you about rebuilding after a marriage ends. It gets quiet in a way that isn't peaceful at first. It's the kind of quiet that sits across from you at dinner and doesn't say anything. It took me the better part of 18 months to stop hearing my ex-husband's voice in that silence and start hearing my own again. His name was Nathan, and we were together for 8 years, married for 5 of them. We met at university in Edmonton, and I thought for a long time that the life we built together was exactly what I wanted. A condo in Beltline, a dog named Huckleberry, weekends at the farmer's market on 4th Street, his family over for Thanksgiving every year without fail. His family. That's where this story really starts. His mother's name was Constance, and she had a way of looking at me that I can only describe as a very long, very careful appraisal, the kind a jeweler gives a piece she suspects might be a fake. From the moment Nathan brought me home to meet her in the 3rd month of our relationship, Constance had a very clear opinion of me, and that opinion was that I was not quite enough. Not flashy enough, not deferential enough, not the kind of daughter-in-law she had designed in her head when she imagined her son's future. She never said it outright. That wasn't her style. It came in the form of comments dropped lightly into conversation, the way you might drop a stone into water, casual but deliberate, watching the ripples. "Gwen, you work such long hours, I don't know how you manage to keep a home." Or, at Christmas one year, after I'd brought a bottle of Okanagan Crush Pad she hadn't asked for. "Oh, how interesting. We usually do a French Bordeaux." Or my personal favorite, delivered at Nathan's cousin's wedding with a smile so bright it could have lit the reception hall. "You know, Gwen, some women are just better suited to careers than to family life. And there's nothing wrong with that." Nathan always laughed it off. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he'd say. "That's just how she is." I heard that sentence so many times over 5 years that I started to believe it. I started to shrink myself down to fit into the space she'd decided I was allowed to occupy. Looking back, that was the thing I'm most angry about. Not the marriage ending. Not even finding out what I found out. It's the shrinking. It's all the ways I made myself smaller so that the people in that family would be more comfortable. The marriage ended in the spring, 14 months before the day I'm about to tell you about. It didn't end dramatically, which almost made it worse. No screaming, no single catastrophic event. Just a long, slow unraveling that I think we both saw coming and neither of us knew how to stop. The papers were signed, the condo sold, Huckleberry went to live with my sister in Red Deer because I couldn't manage a dog in the apartment I moved into, and Nathan went back to his mother's vision of what his life was supposed to look like. I heard through mutual friends that he was seeing someone new by that summer. I heard through his cousin, who still texted me occasionally, that the relationship was serious. I didn't ask for more details. I was too busy putting myself back together to care about the pieces of a life I'd already let go. By the fall, I was genuinely okay. Not performing okay, not fine, in the way women say fine when they mean anything but. Genuinely, surprisingly, quietly okay. I'd taken on 2 new high-net-worth clients at work. I'd started running along the Bow River pathway on Saturday mornings. I'd painted my apartment a deep sage green and put up the art I'd always wanted and never been allowed because Nathan preferred neutral walls. I had built something new, and it was mine in a way nothing had been in a long time. I wasn't thinking about any of that when I walked into the Willow Park Indigo on a Saturday afternoon in December. I was just looking for a book. My father's birthday was coming up, and he'd mentioned something about wanting to read a particular biography of Pierre Trudeau he'd seen reviewed in the Globe. I had 40 minutes before I was supposed to meet a friend for dinner at a restaurant on Macleod Trail. I was wearing my good coat, the charcoal wool one I'd bought myself the previous January as a You Survived the First Year present. And I had a coffee from the cafe next door in my hand, and I was in the most ordinary way possible, completely fine. I was scanning the biography section near the back when I heard the voice. Gwen. I turned around and there she was. Constance, in a cream-colored cashmere coat with a silk scarf knotted at her throat, holding a gift bag in one hand and a copy of some coffee table book in the other. She looked exactly the same as she always had, poised, assembled, deliberate. The thing about Constance is that she doesn't show surprise, she performs it. She let her eyes go wide in that way she had, like she was delighted to see me, and the smile followed a half-second later, the one that never quite touched the corners of her eyes. What a funny coincidence, she said, setting the coffee table book down on a nearby table without looking at it, freeing her hand the way someone does when they're settling in for a conversation they've been planning. Constance, I said. My voice was even. I'd had a year and a half of practice at keeping my voice even when she was involved. You look well, she offered, with the tone of someone slightly surprised by this finding. Thank you. I turned back toward the shelves. She didn't leave. I actually think about you sometimes, she said, moving closer, lowering her voice in that performance of privacy she always used. Like she was confiding in me, like we were close. I wonder if you ever really understood what you had. I looked at her. I didn't say anything. Nathan is so happy now, she continued, and her chin lifted slightly as she said it, the way it always did when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. He and Amber are expecting a baby. Did you know that? A little girl. She paused, letting it settle. She's wonderful with his family, with my grandchildren, with everyone. She just fits, Some people just fit. Amber, my former closest friend, the woman who had been maid of honor at my wedding, the woman who had helped me pick out my dress, who had held my hand when my grandmother died, who had stopped returning my calls about 6 months before Nathan told me he thought we should separate, and whose name I had not let myself say out loud in over a year, because it was the piece of this whole story that still had teeth. Constance was watching my face very carefully. She wanted something to land on. A flinch, tears, the crack that proved she'd been right about me all along, that I was exactly as fragile as she'd always suspected. What she got was nothing, not because I didn't feel it. I felt it. Something moved through me when she said Amber's name, something old and still a little raw underneath everything I'd built on top of it. But I had spent 14 months learning that my feelings weren't a performance for anyone else's benefit, and I wasn't about to offer them up to this woman in the biography section of an Indigo on a Saturday afternoon. Is that right? I said. It wasn't a question. She blinked. She'd expected more than that. I just think you deserve to know, she said, adjusting, shifting to something that sounded like concern but had a different shape underneath it. So, you're not caught off guard. It's going to be public soon, the announcement. I wouldn't want you to find out from someone else and be blindsided. That's thoughtful of you, I said, in the same voice I use when a client is explaining a financial decision I can see 6 problems with and I need them to finish before I can address any of them. Something in my tone made her pause. She reassessed the way she always did when a situation wasn't going the direction she'd expected. I just hope you found something, she added. I know it must be lonely. Starting over at your age. She said it gently, which was the cruelest possible way to say it. Nathan worried about that. He felt terrible. He's a very caring person. He is, I agreed pleasantly. She opened her mouth to say something else and then stopped, because the front door of the store opened and brought in a gust of cold Calgary air and the sound of boots on the mat, and a man's voice said my name from across the store. Gwen, hey. I thought that was your coat. I looked up. Miles Okafor was crossing the store toward me with the easy, unhurried stride of someone who owned whatever room he was standing in, which he usually did, because Miles had been doing that since we were 12 years old, growing up 2 streets apart in Lethbridge. He was wearing a dark green parka and carrying a tote bag, which I knew from experience contained whatever his current reading stack was, because Miles bought books the way some people bought groceries, in quantities that defied available shelf space. Miles was my oldest friend. He was also, as of 9 months ago, my partner. Not in a way I'd announced anywhere, not in a way I'd made into a declaration. Just in the quiet, gradual, completely undramatic way that people who have known each other for 20 years sometimes fall into something real without meaning to. Constance's head turned toward him, and I watched the assessment happen. It was fast. She'd always been fast at that. She took in his coat, his ease, the way he looked at me like the room had gotten better. Hi, she said carefully, because she did not know who this was and she needed to know. Miles, he said, extending his hand with the natural good manners he'd gotten from his parents. Both of them Ghanaian-Canadian professionals who had raised 3 kids in southern Alberta and managed to make it look effortless. You must be a friend of Gwen's. Constance shook his hand and gave him the name she introduced herself with when she wanted to establish context before anything else. I'm Constance, Nathan's mother, Gwen's ex-mother-in-law. Miles absorbed that and glanced at me for exactly half a second, just long enough to read the room. Then he smiled, the one that had gotten him out of trouble since grade 8, easy and warm. Good to meet you. He slipped his arm around my shoulders in the way he'd been doing since we'd started being whatever we were, like it was the most natural thing in the world, because by now it was. Were you two catching up? He asked. Briefly, I said. Constance's eyes moved between us. She was recalibrating. I could see it. She'd walked in here with a very specific script, and it was no longer going the way the script required. Miles works in commercial real estate, I said, not because it mattered, but because I could see her cataloging him, and I found that I had very little patience for it today. He just closed a deal on a mixed-use development out in the SE that he'd been working on for about 2 years. A smaller project, Miles said, with the self-deprecating modesty he always deployed when he was actually proud of something. Only 48 units. Constance's expression shifted in a way she likely didn't intend to be visible. How wonderful, she said, and her voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. Miles's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face did something small and careful. He tilted the screen toward me slightly. It was a news alert from the Calgary Herald business section. I read the headline. The name of the company in the headline was one I recognized. One I had cause to recognize, because I'd spent 5 years hearing about it at Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings and every family gathering, where Nathan's father poured a second scotch and talked about what he was building. I looked at Miles. Is that? He started. Yes, I said. The headline said that Pinnacle Property Group, a Calgary-based residential development firm, was under investigation by the Alberta Securities Commission for misrepresentation in investor disclosures and irregularities in the reporting of pre-sale condominium revenues over a 3-year period. Pinnacle Property Group, the company that Nathan's father had founded and that Nathan had joined as a director 2 years before our marriage ended. The company that had funded the life Constance had described to me with such satisfaction only 5 minutes earlier. I am not a vindictive person. I want to say that clearly, because what I felt in that moment was not triumph. It was something more complicated than that. It was the strange vertiginous feeling of watching a very large thing fall from a very long distance, the kind of fall you can see coming before the impact, and knowing that there's nothing to do except stand still and let it happen. Constance was looking at Miles's phone. She had seen enough of the headline to know. That's. Her voice was thin in a way I had genuinely never heard from her before. She'd always been the most assembled person in every room. That's a misunderstanding. The company has lawyers who handle these things. Of course, Miles said, and his voice was as kind as it always was, which said something about his character. He didn't gloat. It simply wasn't in him. Nathan isn't. She started and then stopped. He's only been on the board for. She stopped again. I thought about Amber then. I thought about the baby announcement Constance had just delivered like a weapon, about the little girl who was coming into a family that was about to have a very different kind of year than anyone had planned for. I thought about what it meant to have your financial security tied to a company under ASC investigation. I thought about the lawyers, the frozen assets, the way these things unspooled publicly in a way that left nowhere to hide. I did not feel glad. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was a deep, settling sadness for the version of myself that had spent 5 years trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. And underneath that sadness, something quieter. Something that felt like release. I should probably call him, Constance said, mostly to herself. She was already reaching into her purse for her phone. The gift bag she'd been carrying was sitting on the shelf beside her, forgotten. The performance was over. Take care, Constance, I said. She looked at me. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, she looked at me without the appraisal. Without the carefully calibrated smile. She just looked at me, and I don't know what she saw, but whatever it was made her look away first. She left quickly. I watched her through the store window as she got to the sidewalk and put her phone to her ear, and then the bookshelves blocked my view and she was gone. Miles stood beside me and didn't say anything for a moment. That's one of the things I love most about him. He knows when words would cost more than silence. You okay? He asked finally. Yeah, I said, and I meant it in a way that surprised me. He picked up a copy of the Trudeau biography from the shelf I'd been standing in front of and turned it over to read the back. Is this for your dad? It is. Good choice. He tucked it under his arm. I'll buy it. Early Christmas. We walked to the register together, and he paid for my father's book the way he did things, without making it into anything, and we left the store and walked out into the Calgary December, which was exactly as cold and clear and bright as Calgary Decembers always are. The kind of cold that makes the air feel clean all the way down. I didn't feel victorious walking out of that store. I didn't feel vindicated. I'm not sure I felt any of the things I might have imagined feeling back when I used to lie awake at 2 in the morning and replay every Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas morning and run through all the things I should have said. What I felt was lighter. That's the only word that fits. Like something I'd been carrying without knowing I was carrying it had quietly put itself down, and I was walking away from it without even having to try. I thought about the years I spent making myself smaller for a family that never intended to expand to fit me. I thought about the version of myself who would have cried in a bookstore, who would have let Constance Cole's satisfaction become her shame. And I was genuinely glad that version of me was gone. Not because something bad had happened to the people who'd made her feel small, but because she'd been replaced by someone who'd spent 14 months getting louder inside her own life, in the quiet way that counts. Miles held the door of the restaurant open for me that evening, and the warmth and the noise and the good smell of food coming from the kitchen rushed out to meet us, and I stepped inside thinking that this, right here, was the life I'd been building without realizing I was building it. Not a revenge. Not a victory. Just a life, steady and solid and entirely mine, that had gotten better every single month I stopped trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I was supposed to be. That's the thing about the people who try to make you feel like leaving, was the best thing that ever happened to them. Sometimes the truest answer you can give them isn't a comeback or a confrontation or even a carefully delivered truth. Sometimes the truest answer is just everything you've quietly become while they were busy congratulating themselves on your absence. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I want you to know you're not alone, and I want you to stick around, because I share a new story every week, real moments of people who chose themselves and found out, in the most unexpected ways, that the quiet life they built was worth every single thing they let go of to get there. Hit subscribe before you leave, and I'll see you in the next one.